Would you please stand? You may be seated. Good morning, friends, and welcome to First United Methodist Church, Stillwater. It's our honor to have you here today as we celebrate a life well lived. There are those who are joining us on the live stream, and we are so grateful that you're able to do that as well. I wanted to offer just a word to those of you who are joining us on the live stream that when we play the songs, because they are copyrighted, we're going to have to mute that on the live stream, or else YouTube will take down the live stream, and we don't want that to happen. So we'll hear them here in the sanctuary, but if you're joining us on the live stream, I just wanted to let you know about that. Well, we have gathered here this day to praise God and to witness to our faith as we celebrate the life of Johnnie Robert Kropp. We come together this day in grief, acknowledging our human loss, and we pray that God would grant us grace, that in pain we may find comfort, in sorrow we may find hope, and finally, for all of us, in death, we may find resurrection. Will you pray with me? O God, who gave us birth, you are ever more ready to hear than we are to pray. You know our needs before we ask and our ignorance in asking. So give to us now your grace, that as we shrink before the mystery of death, we may see the light of eternity. Speak to us once more your solemn message of life and death. Help us live as those who are prepared to die. And when our days here are accomplished, enable us to die as those who go forth to live, so that living or dying, our life may be in you, and that nothing, in life or in death, will ever be able to separate us from your great love in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. As we hear our first song, just in case those on the live stream are just joining us, we want you to know that we're going to mute that for the live stream, but we will get to hear it in the sanctuary. Several are here today to give witness to Bob's life, and so first I'd like to invite Hershel Brewster to come and share.
Tell you what, let's take a deep breath. We probably all need it. I wrote down a few notes. You know, we could talk about this guy for 32 days and then start over again, but when they told me 3 minutes, I didn't hear that. So if I told Paul I was going to be first, and if I go a little longer than that, forgive me, but this is a very important day to so many people and for Southwest or OSU, and we're so proud of Bob. You know, my path ran across Bob in January 1973. Little did I know he would have such a profound influence on my life. I was a member of the 73 judging team, and I think all the judging team members will agree with, I hope, all of what I say, but at least 90% of what I say today about Bob. You know, in 73, we was in a different era. We was in hippie days. We traveled real high class. We had a 1971 Chevrolet station wagon, yeah. We put 8 people in that plus luggage and go all across the world. No cell phones. Bob's way of getting reservations was really unique. He'd pull into a motel, he'd turn around and say, "Sit here." He'd go to the front door, he'd ask the question, "Y'all have ESPN?" If they said no, we went to the next one. I can remember us making 4 stops before we found ESPN, and it wasn't by no means the best looking motel we ended up in that night, but that was very important to him, and it was for us. You know, Bob was only 5 years older than a lot of us. There was no question about who was in charge. Like I said, in the hippie days, you know, I remember when I went to Stillwater, walked across campus, standing in front of Ag Hall, and some of y'all was there with me. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but you could see a little bit of everything and a lot of things. And walk across campus, and you'd see students smoking weed as they walked across there wide open, and it wasn't even legal at that time, not even for recreational use. You know, that's just the way it was. But we had all kinds of drugs, of all kinds. Marijuana was a simple one. Well, several of us on the team called him Daddy Bob. And some probably say, well, why was that? Well, I'll tell you why. We respected the man. And we dang sure knew who was the boss when we was with him. There was no question about that. As we went on, we could see the respect that he kindred among other university coaches and in the industry around the world. His reputation was one to be sought after, and many of us did. We never could get there, but we sought after it. Bob was a vicious competitor. He couldn't make himself say lose. It'd come out something else, but it wasn't lose. That flowed throughout the team. We worked hard. We worked diligent. We knew we were good. I got 2 guys sitting over here that was on the team, and I'm sure there's others here, but we knew we were good, and we knew we were going to be knocking on the door. Well, He expected our best, not second best. He expected the best. And we tried to deliver that. We was successful because of his attitude. There was no talking about second. There was no talking about losing. We walked in, and probably the other universities, Danny, probably talked about the cocky OSU boys. Well, we wasn't cocky. We knew, by God, we was in the hunt, and we was there to win. And, he carried that on through his whole career, not just in coaching, but in life. Like I said, he wasn't just a coach. He cared about us as individuals and our families. He asked about it. One thing I'll never forget about Kropp, and it took years to get it, reason he did a lot of this, he wanted to help us succeed in life. And he did. Bob, while we was doing all this, was working on his PhD in nutrition. Not only did he have the judging team, and that was a new venture, but he was trying to work on his doctorate in nutrition, and he come up, his thesis was on ruminal microbial protein synthesis from urea when fed with low roughages in cattle. Well, I was fortunate enough to get to watch him and help him some when he done that testing. They'd feed different roughages and different additives to cattle, and then these cattle had, you all have seen them if you've been in animal science business much, had windows in their sides, and we'd open that, take a sample of that, and he would test that. Now let it be known right now, I was a gopher. I didn't understand anything we was doing, but I could follow instructions, so that's what I did. Well, and while we was out there spending hours, we had a lot of time to visit. And I told Kropp one evening, I said, Bob, I want to get married. And he said, okay. He said, Carol? And I said, yeah. And he looked at me and he said, do you like her? And I said, well, yeah. I said, Bob, I love her. I won't spend my life. He said, I didn't ask you if you loved her. He said, that comes later. He said, you got to like her for it to work. Well, he was always wanting to ask a question and make you wonder. But he could always make a question or have a statement that made me think. Well, in time, he hit the mixture that made his paper show what it needed to be to utilize the roughages. That paper was published all over the United States. He went all over the country giving that. And from that, Bob Kropp was known as a renowned nutritionist. Really, he was a renowned chemist, and the nutritionists just come with it. He judged shows and was sought to judge shows all over the world. Purebred cattle shows, state and national shows, beef cattle market shows, and Bob was always real conscientious. When he got through, he always said, when you get through judging, you want to feel like you got the best one that was there that day. And so he really worked at that. We can all remember in the 80s when the beef cattle industry got carried away and we got to seeing really extreme cattle, the size, the height, the length, and it was even hard for the packers to process. Well, there was several cattlemen got together, and cattlemen associations got together and said, we've got to make a change so we can have a cattle business that is sustainable. And Bob was in that group and led that way. He was an innovator in the cattle business. Well, his strongest strength was probably dealing with students. The thousands and thousands and thousands of students he counseled, was an advisor to, was just a friend, and he cared for them. He cared for them. Our son come to OSU and graduated in 2004, and he wasn't in animal science, but he'd go over and see Bob, and they'd visit, or they'd go do something together. And to this day, they've remained close friends. Well, I've talked a lot about Bob. Never scratched the surface. Well, to me, Bob Kropp, Dr. Bob Kropp, was a chemist, nutritionist, judging team coach, a national judge, advisor, counselor, mentor, and a real friend. Bob had a mindset that I've never seen in my life, in anyone else. He could sit there and talk about chemistry in these equations, and somebody walk in his door, a freshman kid that had trouble with his car, and he wanted to know where to take him to get it fixed. And he could swing that fast, but he could relate to people, and it didn't matter if they were chemists or freshmen in college. Well, I've never known nothing like him. Never known of another one that had that mind, that could talk technical or help people socially. Bob was an extraordinary person, trailblazer, cut trails no one else was able to. A true cowboy, a consummate cowboy. Rest in peace, Daddy Bob.
Next, we're going to hear from Thomas Walverin.
Hershel had the start of his career, and I feel like I'm here on not the tail end. There was a few years after me. It's only fitting that I saw him more in the classroom. For those of us in my generation, I didn't think I could give a Kropp talk unless I had 4 different versions. Yes, Diana, I ran them myself. You didn't have to run them for me. Everyone here, and you're here because you have a Kropp story. And I must share a few. I told Paul I would be brief. In fact, I told Paul, I said, I'm not speaking. And he said, Dad sure thinks you are. So here I am. My first meeting with Dr. Kropp was nearly my last. It was April the 19th in 2004, the 9th anniversary of the most tragic day in Oklahoma history. I had registered with classes as a transfer student for the fall. It was my first time in Stillwater, actually. Second time in Oklahoma. Dr. Geiser had sent me upstairs to see Kropp as he coordinated student farm labor and knew I needed a job. My mother accompanied me up the stairs, and we met with Kropp, and we were going through that, taking information, and I remember asking Kropp, Dr. Kropp, please tell her that tornadoes aren't that bad. Me coming from Northwest Georgia, that was one of her concerns. And in typical Kropp fashion, he leans back in his chair and he says, oh no, they're not that bad. 5 years ago, we got hit. But we knew it was coming for several miles. We had plenty of time. And then he told of how the chandelier was still hanging in the foyer, how there was mud in the back of the TV, and of course, more details, but I had tuned out because I knew this was my last time ever here. That wasn't the case. Like many of you, before it was over, he had convinced my mother it was okay and that it would be fine. And as we left, he said, don't worry about tornadoes. Don't worry about a job. I have your information, and I'll take care of you. And that he did. I'm not unique to that. Many of you are in here have shared stories of similar since his passing. When he told you he would take care of you, he did, all the way through. Now, if we transfer over into a classroom, Kropp was a little different in the class, to put it mildly. He was all business. His swagger, bravado, engaging personality naturally commanded respect. His lectures always included a story, whether to illustrate an example of why that day's subject was important, or perhaps he just liked the story. Either way, he kept you engaged. However, if you were distracted in class, he had no problem addressing it head on. Pun intended. And those of you who know the dry erase marker. Now, we didn't get to see the bowling moves rover before we got there. I don't care if you were in the 8th row, the 9th row, or the 1st row. He was direct with that dry erase marker. If you had an O'Collie, you would end up eating it. After he had your attention, and I'm in the church, so we're going to word it this way. After we had your attention, he, in his direct and classic style of communication, started to tell you, normally in a very colorful instruction with a blended use of adjectives and nouns, on how to make your way to the door. Often a reminder of whose class it was and that you and your parents were paying for it. They might last 2 minutes. It might last what felt like for 10. They were direct. But the important part of this to me is after class was over, I witnessed it firsthand as a student. Thankfully, it wasn't me that time. But as a TA, often he found whoever he had corrected, and he'd walk up and put his arm around them and tell them with a straight face after he just chewed them, and he meant every word of it, I'm not mad at you. I just want you to learn something and take and apply it. He's the only person I know that could publicly berate you in front of everyone, and you'd still be standing in the hall waiting on that hug. He was a walking encyclopedia of industry events, and he knew all the players that drove them. One other story, in 2009, I was a graduate student for Dr. Carter. It's Thursday afternoon, and he comes to me and he says, I need you to go with me this weekend. I've already cleared it with Carter. There was no choice, and I was happy to do it. We were headed to El Coyote Ranch for one of his consulting for the Longhorn breed. But our first stop was the State Fair of Texas, where he was to judge the Beefmaster show. After the show, he insisted on taking me around and showing me the State Fair of Texas, and of course, we had to stop for a Fletcher's corn dog and visit Big Tex. Once back on the road, he said, well, what'd you think of the show? I said, well, you surprised me. Puzzled, he looked at me, and I said, you picked a black and white Beefmaster? And yeah, I can't do his voice, but he's driving, but you can see this. He goes, two things. I was not the superintendent. It's their job to put what they want in the class. I was the judge. My job was to pick the best one there. As I should have known, you never argue or buck with Kropp. A few moments passed, and then he started on his historical venture of reminding me of 1969, Chicago, when Dr. Good at K-State picked the first crossbred steer. And as he would say, more importantly, Dr. Todashak picked the larger framed Angus bull from Canada that changed the trajectory of the beef industry. The next 2 hours on our way to San Marcos, before he stopped for me to drive, was a rendition of the history, a recitation of industry changes, complete with registered names, cow families, and of course an emphasis on the breeders with ties to OSU. I don't remember all the details, but I'll never forget his ability to resuscitate that. As an advisor, he knew those degree sheets backwards. He knew what could be exchanged and how to get it done. It was always about you and what you needed to stay on track for your goals, and sometimes the goals he had for you. Everyone wanted a reference letter from him. Kropp seemingly had an endless contacts and connections. No matter where he was, he knew someone. He was the ultimate people person. He welcomed you with a smile on his face, that booming greeting, and ladies, always with a hug. Ever proud of his family, he would light up bigger than his native Texas to tell of their success. He showed that love and commitment by the way he protected and cared for Susan when her health faded. Carson and Kennedy, it didn't matter if it was a cheer competition, an award ceremony, or sporting events. If he had a picture, he passed it on. He would text it on. And you could wait on that phone call to tell you the details. How proud. I'm going to miss him. He was a proud alumnus who took loyal and true to heart. He loved OSU, and more importantly, he loved Oklahoma State Animal Science. For 42 years, he walked the halls as a coach, a professor, and a colleague. An astute historian, he honored the brand legends that came before him. All while carving his place on what I call the Rushmore of OSU Animal Science. I'm grateful for April the 19th, 2004. I'm grateful that when Susan couldn't remember my name, I was one of Bob's boys. And Kropp, I'm forever grateful for you.
Chris Hardy.
I'm somewhat envious of a lot of you because I was kind of the outward child that came into this equation. Have known Bob and knew Bob for a very long time, did not have the benefit of being a student or being in school with him, but the relationship goes back a very long way. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I called Bob and I told him that I had a problem. And he said, "What's your problem?" I said, "Man, I've got this special affliction." And he said, "Well, what is your affliction?" I said, "Bob, there's things that I should remember and would benefit from. Can't remember those, but I can recall classes of livestock I evaluated in 1972. He laughed with the same laugh, Paul, that I hear in your voice today. And may you keep that going. Carson, you and Kennedy, you need to inherit that and take it forward. But returning to my affliction, he said, "Hardy, you don't have an affliction. What it amounts to is that there was a passion that you had at the time that allowed you to vividly recall those moments." I tell you this because I have come to realize that Bob's passion for life was pretty darn incredible. His career, and whether it was his family or his career, his friends, or his hobbies, there was an unbelievable passion and drive to be not only the best, but also encourage the best in others, and he did that. 1974, my parents were attending a bull sale. It was a joint sale between that OSU and Spur Ranch held together. Bob had just returned back to Oklahoma State, was already making a very big impression. Upon returning home, and we were living in North Florida, my parents told me of an exceptional young man that they had encountered that I needed to meet someday. Several years ago, after that, we were able to meet and then reacquainted ourselves as members of the International Brangus Breed Board of Directors. We shared a lot of moments there, and Bob Kropp was Bob Kropp. He was analyzing everything, and we would often sit at board meetings. Someone would stand up and be grandstanding and trying to make a proud moment for themselves, wanting to hear themselves talk. And he would nudge me under the table with his knee, or else throw that eyebrow up at me, knowing it was going to be hard for me to keep my composure while he was doing all of this. It was vintage Bob Kropp. About 15 years ago, we were reconnected. The last 10 years, I have considered him to be the big brother that I never had. It's been an incredible blessing to claim Bob as a close personal friend. We talk frequently about everything and everybody, and many of you. Most of it was good. There would be a time that we would start to slip to the dark or the ugly side, and he would redirect us to get back on path. In our maturity, and I see some of that in you today, and y'all decide what that means. I'm going to let you deal with that. But in our maturity, we solved, and I'm convinced that we did, most of the world's problems. We solved the cattle industry's problems. We solved Oklahoma State's problems. We solved each other's personal problems. We solved political problems, sports problems. The only problem was no one called Bob Kropp and I and asked us what we thought. He had a brilliant mind, incredibly brilliant. And I thank God that he was right most of the time, because a man hated to be wrong. And not only that, he was not very fond of you reminding him when he was wrong. In 2010, we had a lengthy visit talking about the past, the what ifs, and the future. He had a very great sense of joy and satisfaction in what he had accomplished at Oklahoma State. He also looked so much forward to being free from the demands of work. He looked forward to following his and Susan's agenda and watching his grandchildren grow and succeed. Carson, you and Kennedy hung his moon, and he was quick to share that with a lot of us. We don't get to dictate what life's going to throw at us and how things can change beyond our control. Most of you are somewhat aware of the challenges and the health issues that Bob and his family have faced over the last several years. I will always marvel at his attitude, especially in dealing with his own personal ills. He privately expressed, and I felt honored to be able to have those confidential conversations, but he privately expressed his grief, fear, and anxiety over Susan and Paul's journeys. On the other hand, he almost always remained positive and optimistic about his own well-being, regardless of how dire it seemed at the time. I vividly remembered his bout with COVID and how it about took it away from us at the time. I went to see him. I was scared to death. I figured it was going to be the end. There was a group text that started regarding Bob's well-being and where he might go. Those of you that were on that group text, please don't raise your hand for fear that I may embarrass you in the next few comments that I make. As it circulated around, someone had posted a question regarding, would Bob ever get out of the bed, or would he be refined to a wheelchair the rest of his life? Whoever you are, I want to thank you today, because you expedited his recovery in a big fashion. Never seen that man so mad. You kept curing. It was miraculous. That post had not been there for hardly any length of time, and he called me. And his voice got high, and he said, "Hardy, did you see that?" And I said, "Yeah." And he went into a rant and rave and talked in unknown tongues as only Bob Kropp could do. Whoever you are, I thank you for helping heal Bob Kropp over that episode. Bob battled a number of tough situations in the last 10 years, and he miraculously battled them and conquered them, and won. He has battled death several times and won. Sunday morning was a week ago. He conquered death. It's not my place to judge Bob Kropp. However, I do know, or I believe sincerely that I know where his heart and faith were. Got a couple of stories that I think reflect where Bob's heart was recently. Daily, I receive Bible scriptures and a devotional from a commercial cow friend of mine. I then forward and have the pleasure and the blessing of being able to forward them on to other people. Several years ago, I added Bob and Susan to this list of recipients. They went out each day. Not long after they were added to the list, there was an interruption. Somebody lost their phone. I had a cow step on mine and crushed it. I don't know what the case was. But there was an interruption in their transfer. Bob called me, and as he always addressed me, "Hardy, are you okay?" I replied, "Yes," and asked, "Why did he ask?" Very quickly, "Susan and I haven't received our devotionals, and we look forward to them. Where are they?" I knew he was concerned about me, but the pertinent thing right then and very directly is, I expect to get them. Where are they? At that time, I knew Bob was listening to them, reading them, and they were important in his life. He clearly understood that there was his will and there was also God's will. Last year, about this time, Bob called and told me, he said, "Man, I'm moving to Ohio." I didn't quite know how to take it, and to be honest with you, I was quite concerned and bothered by this at the time. The selfish side of me knew that I was losing a supper buddy when I was in Stillwater. A couple of days before he and Mariette headed out for Ohio, he and I met for dinner one night. In a very private setting, I noticed a sparkle in his eye and almost a boyish grin on his face. And I quite frankly looked at him very directly and asked him, "Are you happy?" His immediate response is one that I hope I never forget, because it has changed the way I think about things. His immediate response was, "Yes, I'm happy. Hardy, I'm going about the business of living again." There was a passage penned by Robert Louis Stevenson, Emerson, and others, changed it, that addressed the man that lived well and achieved success. Today, I'm going to take the liberty of paraphrasing it a little more as I think it fits Bob's life. That man who has laughed often, loved much, and brought smiles to the faces of others has lived well. That man who has earned the respect and admiration of his students and peers has lived well. That man who has seen pure happiness and success in his children and his grandchildren has lived well. That man who has known the love of a good woman has lived well. That man, finally, who has recognized the splendor in God's creation and found his purpose in life has lived well. Bob Kropp, a job well done. Indeed, you have lived well, my friend. Thank you.
I'd like to invite John Jeffrey to come forward.
First, let me say it's a real honor to be here today to speak on behalf of the family and to celebrate a life that was well worth living. When Dr. Kropp asked me to speak, as with usual, you never tell him no. Whatever he asks you to do, you always say yes. So as I had time flying home from Alabama that week and thinking to myself of all the things and all the memories, which would I choose to speak of? And this kind of hit me out of the blue. There's a song that Willie Nelson made famous, and it's a saying that we all use. My heroes have always been cowboys. So Paul and I are unique. We're only sons of two cowboys that were heroes in our life. Unfortunately, he and I both have the misfortune of sharing that we've lost those heroes in the last year. So if you take the word cowboy and take each letter, I think it describes Dr. Bob Kropp. The first letter, C, confident. He was always impeccably dressed, very well spoken, and when he walked into a room, he filled that room with his essence. Optimistic, the greatest smile ever, always positive, very gregarious. As my mom said when I came to school here, she said, you know, Dr. Kropp looks like George Strait. And I said, yes, ma'am, he does. Wise. Dr. Kropp is very wise. Many of us as students or friends sought counsel from him. He was bold, wasn't he? Yes. His leadership, he was bold in his leadership, he was bold in his ideas. He always thirsted for knowledge, and he always cared about those of us that walked that hall that were students. Now, the next one you won't find, you will not be surprised by the word I chose for this one. Opinionated. He stood for what he believed in, and he never wavered. Now, the last letter that spells cowboy gets a little bit hard to find a word that starts with Y. So I took the liberty to just add a few things to that, and I made it unyielding. Dr. Kropp was unyielding for his love of our university, his faculty members, the staff, and especially and above all the students. You know, he could see more in us than we could see in ourselves. And I'm a perfect example of that. When I came to school here, he taught, I think it was called transfer class. I don't remember exactly what the name of it was, but it was for all those of us that were either transferring in from junior college or were maybe incoming freshmen. And at the beginning of that class, he asked all of us to write a paper and tell him what our expectations were of ourselves, what our goals were, what our dreams were, and where we expected ourselves to be in our future. So I wrote a pretty good paper, I thought. When mine got handed back to me, it was covered in red ink. Now, the red ink was not there for mistakes. The red ink was written so that I guess it would be an impression on me what he expected. Now, folks, the list of the things that he expected from me was extremely long. He expected things of me I hadn't even thought about expecting of myself. So let's fast forward to the spring of my senior year. And I'm sure many of you in here have had some form of the unacceptable speech. He may not have used that word. He liked that word. But when he thought that you had not achieved what he thought you should achieve, as Thomas spoke of, you could get an eraser thrown at you. But it was verbal, and he would tell you exactly what he thought. So one day I called and asked or told him that I would not be attending the class he had that day because I had something else I needed to do. And that's the day that I got the unacceptable speech. And it probably only lasted 5 to 10 minutes, but it felt like it lasted for 30. And by the time I got off the phone with him, I was like, oh man, he's never going to speak to me again. Well, fast forward a little bit, and I came back to graduate school. And I'll tell you, I mean, I'd been in contact with him some, but I was pretty nervous to come back to school. Now, he was not my major professor. Dr. Glenn Dolezal was, but most of the people in the department probably thought that Dr. Bob Kropp was. And as I stated before, he always knows more about you than you know about yourself. And I thank God for the gifts and talents that he gave me, and I thank God for Dr. Bob Kropp for pointing me in the right direction to use the skills and abilities that I was given to not only improve myself, but also to represent the university. He would send me to judge shows. It was countless the things he would send me to do. He would call me and say, Pard, you need to come to my office. Well, I knew on the walk over there I was getting ready to be assigned a task. I just didn't know what it was going to be. But as usual, the answer was not no. Thomas mentioned Bob's boys. Susan named the group of young men, or maybe we're not so young anymore, that were part of that group that she referred to as Bob's boys. And she would say that they would take care of everything and get it done. Is that right, Thomas? So I stole something from Willie Nelson, so now I'm going to steal a little something from Clem McSpadden. I'm sure all of you that have been to any rodeo that Clem McSpadden was the announcer of, he always gave his prayer. And no, I did not memorize it, nor I recite all of it. But as a child growing up and listening to that prayer, the very last part of that prayer is really what always stuck in my heart. It says, where the grass grows lush, lush, green, and stirrup high, and the water runs cold, clear, and deep. Bob, I hope God's holding you in the palm of his hand, and you're resting along one of those grassy, green pastures along that cool, deep water, and get to enjoy some really good cows. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Julie McMahon French.
This isn't written on my paper, but gentlemen, Dr. Kropp had some girls too. I started OSU in 1980, and Dr. Kropp was my advisor. And it just occurred to me yesterday, as I was kind of scanning the wonderful life story that was presented, it occurred to me that I was 18, and I did the math, and he was 33. I guess I thought he was about 50, maybe 60, which would make him over 100. And from the stories we've heard, I think maybe, his life was filled with so many amazing capacities of the different things we've heard today, that maybe he did probably complete those 100 years in a shorter time. Dr. Kropp also advised my dad in the Angus business, and there were 5 members of my family, including me, who were his advisees at OSU. He truly was a member of our family, the McMahon family in Arkansas, and we've been cherished his valuable advice and encouragement, especially in the years after my dad died and the succession plan was in place, and he was there for us. The story I will tell you today happened when I was 36. I was 14 years out of college, still calling Dr. Kropp and seeking his advice. When I got my call from Dr. Kropp and the assignment to tell this story, I found out it was one that even Paul didn't know. When I thought about Dr. Kropp's role as an advisor to all of us, those who are here who were maybe his students who was assigned to him or his colleagues that he also advised, I thought about the fact that he was a great judge of character. And for lots of people, maybe they were standing in third place one time. He may have been a better judge of character than he was of cattle every now and then. But he really knew people, as we've already heard. He had terrific insight to people. He had a clear and deep understanding of who you were, even when you weren't so sure yourself. He had a vision, he had a perception that was, again, just sort of beyond normal people's awareness. He had this vision for you, if you were his student, as to what you could accomplish, what you were capable of, what your potential was. And he wasn't never shy about announcing it to you. As we've heard, Dr. Kropp was the ultimate connector, a connector for information, for experience, and certainly for his students, for opportunities. Dr. Kropp believed in us so we could learn to believe in ourselves. When I started in 1980, I was the first student in the option that Dr. Kropp had designed called livestock merchandising. He designed this option for students that were destined to be in the purebred cattle industry, because he had figured out that, the marketing they taught in Ag Econ wasn't the same sort of marketing that we had to do. He designed this program for me. Dr. Coffey, you don't have it anymore, so I'll keep all my notes in case you get some students that need it. Dr. Kropp really, at that time, he was very flexible with my plan, because he was figuring out what the curriculum was going to be. I was very involved in campus activities, and he helped me choose electives and even sometimes change classes where I could spend more time in the business college and spend more time over in advertising and PR in the journalism school. At the time that I was getting about a junior in college, we had a new judging coach coming to OSU over from Miami, Oklahoma, and he was teaching all of us in judging, and which I took, and there was talk among Dr. Tadashek and Gerald Callahan that, boy, that girl can sure talk, if we could just teach her to pick the right ones. And I went to Dr. Kropp and said, this is what they're saying. What should I do? And he said, don't listen to them. You just need to keep doing what you're doing. The judging team is not where you're headed. I kept my connection with Dr. Kropp through my first job, which was at the Texas Angus Association, a job, I might add, that my dad was completely and thoroughly opposed for me to take. And I called 3 people. One of them was Dr. Kropp when I was offered the job, and he said, don't listen to your dad, go take that job. I was invited to apply for a new program at Texas A&M, which was led by Dr. Bill Pope, who had been at OSU and had been a teacher of my dad's. Again, my dad was not, he wasn't against it, he just didn't think I was going to get chosen. But Dr. Kropp was there, and he was encouraging me. He said, who do I write the letter to? And I said, write it to Bill Pope. He said, I got this. When I started a business that was focused on, of course, livestock merchandising, I called Dr. Kropp frequently. He was my go-to. He was my first call. He was sometimes my last call. But he always helped me shape, what to do next, helped me ask the right questions, helped me develop ideas that could help my clients succeed. I think I told him during that time period, and we solidified it, that he was my advisor for life. My business was based in Fort Worth. I had an office in the Fort Worth stockyards in the Livestock Exchange building. To keep busy in the summer times when it got slow, we got involved in festival management, in tourism development, and we even planned and executed parades and all kinds of things. Well, skip back to that day when Dr. Kropp told me to forget about the judging team. I happened to be the homecoming parade chairman 2 years in a row for the whole campus. I did experience you've probably thrown that out before, hey, don't rain on my parade. Well, mine was the one that was completely rained out. Dr. Kropp said, it's okay, everybody enjoyed it. I was also involved in political work and communications for different initiatives within the city, had good connections at City Hall, and at one point, my client was the Fort Worth Sports Authority, and I got to be involved in the beginnings of Texas Motor Speedway. None of this had anything to do with livestock merchandising, but the fact is, I always told those people, if you can sell bull semen, you can pretty much sell anything. And I sell bull semen better than anybody else. Bruton Smith's people loved that one. I love history, and I'd gotten very involved in the Fort Worth Stockyards development that was going on at that time. It was so exciting. 25 years ago was nothing like it is now, but we were headed that way. I was involved in the Stockyards Historical Society. I became an avid student of all things Cowtown. In October of 1998, I got a call from the mayor's office. I had worked with them, asking me to come down for a meeting. When I asked what it was about, the answer was, we'll tell you when you get here. I walked into the meeting and I said, okay, which one of you is selling Amway? Because when they won't tell you what the meeting's about, it's because they're trying to drag you into a network marketing scheme. Well, that wasn't it. There were 8 or 10 people there, the mayor, the city manager, a few city council members, some other staff people that I didn't know. I sat down and they started the pitch. Fort Worth was planning its sesquicentennial celebration. That's 150 years. The following June of 1999. They pitched an idea, it was a dream really, of creating a herd of longhorns and conducting a daily cattle drive. They spun all these crazy statements and I was listening, and finally one of them said, well, what do you think? And I said, this is the craziest thing I have ever heard. It will never work. And they all sat there and stared at me, and finally I said, why are you asking me? And then the mayor said, "Well, you're the only person that we know who knows anything about cows." I continued with my protest. I cited a litany of reasons that it could never be pulled together in 8 months, and it would never work to drive Texas Longhorns on a city street every day. I had so many reasons that finally the mayor said, "Will you just think about it?" I took a breath and said, "Okay, I'll think about it." I left. As I drove back out to the stockyards, my mind was racing. I was imagining all the things that could go wrong if they didn't involve someone who knows something about cattle and history and tourism. But then I stopped and I went, "Texas Longhorns?" And then it hit me. I raced into my office, sat down at my desk, and I called Dr. Kropp. I spelled out this crazy idea with all the insane details they had in mind. I was totally sure that he would tell me it cannot be done, and then I would be off the hook in my agreement, and I didn't have to think about it anymore. Instead, he exclaimed with a long string of adjectives, "This is amazing. This is fantastic. I can't believe you called me." Then he said, "Let's do it." And in that moment, Dr. Kropp joined in the project. The Fort Worth herd took its first step toward reality. My next call was back to the mayor's office that very afternoon, and I said, "Okay, we're in. Let's start tomorrow." Dr. Kropp joined a small elite team. We had a couple of historical experts. We had the Parks and Rec director. We had a few other people to begin planning. We had 8 months to put this whole thing together. The Parks and Rec director, Richard Zavala, was fantastic. He crafted our mission statement, which was to be historically accurate, culturally authentic, and Disney perfect. Dr. Kropp's role was to connect us with the Texas Longhorn Breeders Association of America, which he served as a consultant and frequent advisor. He worked with the breeders to procure steers, and he also developed the herd plan of how they would care for the steers, where they would house them, what they would feed them, the whole thing. All of his skills came together, creating a herd of cattle. He'd picked cattle for all kinds of breeders. He'd never picked cattle for a city. He even designed the training program for the animals and the people to teach them to walk down a city street every day. Dr. Kropp personally selected the steers based on their horn length and shape. They were all trophy steers. Their size, their conformation, their color pattern, age, their health, their docility. No detail was left out. We started with a plan to acquire 10 steers for no particular reason. Some would be donated, as Dr. Kropp would ask for them to be donated by the breeders. Others, not so easy to acquire by donation, and we'd have to buy them. Oh, I think I left out. The city did not give us a budget. I was told, do whatever it takes, do it right, and get it done in 8 months. We had our first task was to launch a parade. Remember back in that experience where he told me not to go to the judging team to run the homecoming parade? Well, I was given the task to run a parade of steers, and we had about 500 riders from the convention center in the south of downtown, 3 miles north to the stockyards. That's crazy. I have no idea how many times I called Dr. Kropp in those months. Every time he responded with an idea, a solution, encouragement, or, I don't know, got to think about that one. One morning in mid-spring, as we were heading toward June, I was at home getting ready, and I don't really know how my mind works, but somehow blow-drying my hair makes really big ideas happen. And I'm blow-drying my hair, and I thought, hey, wait a minute. Put the hairdryer down, walked in, got my phone, called the mayor's office, and I said, I need to meet with the mayor this morning. Is he available? And his secretary said, yeah, let me see. And she came back and she said, yeah, he's here. He said, come on by. Remember, no budget, no hierarchy. They trusted us to do what was right. I walked in and Ken Barr asked, well, what's up? I explained, we're going to need 15 steers. And he said, why is that? And I said, because I have this idea that each one can represent a decade of Fort Worth's history when we introduce them to the city in the newspaper. When the people know the steers and they know them by name and they know their history, they will now know the history of the city of Fort Worth. Mayor Barr didn't hesitate. He said, call Dr. Kropp, we're going to need 5 more steers. There were plenty of twists and turns as we navigated the completely unknown toward the launch date of June 12, 1999. But I have to say, Dr. Kropp's loyal and true commitment to the project, his insight, his vision, his connection, his good judgment were positively pivotal to the creation of a now world-renowned, completely unique tourist destination that has preserved and perpetuated the history of cattle and Cowtown. I read in a recent issue of Fort Worth magazine, the Fort Worth herd's cattle drives are a cornerstone of local tourism, consistently ranked as the city's top attraction and one of the most visited in Texas. With its twice-daily nod to Fort Worth's western roots, the herd not only honors the past, but continues to draw global attention to the stockyards, solidifying its place as a cultural and historical treasure. That was crazy. The city estimates that now in the 26th year, the Fort Worth herd has been experienced by over 12 million visitors from all over the world. Because of Dr. Kropp's role in a crazy idea that would never work, the Fort Worth herd continues to be historically accurate, culturally authentic, and Disney perfect. I want to leave you with another crazy idea. Maybe it's not so crazy because I actually tried it this morning at 5 a.m. Call Dr. Kropp. His spirit lives in all of us, and he will answer. I know it because he answered me this morning. I thank you so much for this opportunity to tell a story that you didn't know and probably very few other people knew. I'm so grateful for my time at OSU and my time as a advisee for life from Dr. Bob Kropp. And I believe that all of us have a duty to share what he did for us and pass it on to others. And that's the best way that we can remember him and his spirit will live.
I'd like to invite Brent Lynn.
Thank you, Paul, for asking me to speak today. It's a huge honor for me. I met Dr. Kropp one morning at Holodome out here south on 51 about 6:30 in the morning for breakfast. I was working at the Fort Worth Stockyards, and my boss, T.J. Peters, knew that I was coming to school up here, and he said, we need to go look at some black Simmental heifers at Lenapaw, Oklahoma, and then we're going to go to Diamond, Missouri, and we're going to be back in Stillwater and meet with a fella. You need to meet him. he had a bag phone at the time, and on our way up there, he called Dr. Kropp and he said, "Hey, Kropp, we're gonna be in Stillwater tomorrow morning about 6:30. How about you meet us there? You need to meet a guy." And all I heard was, "We'll be there." So sure enough, at 6:30 that next morning, Dr. Kropp comes in there and has breakfast with us, and I was out of junior college, and I really didn't know which direction to go, other than I wanted to be on the judging team at Stillwater and be a part of this family that's sitting in here today. And he looked at me and he said, "You go back to work at the yards." He said, "I'll have you a place to live. I'll have you a place to work." He said, "Call me about a week before school starts." And I did. I showed back up here, and he put a down payment down for my apartment. He helped me move in. It didn't take much. I had everything in the front seat of a single cab pickup, so it didn't take us very long. But he helped me move in. And he said, "I got you a job at the Animal Science Arena." And he said, "When I can, I'll get you out the beef barn. You can live out there for free." He kept getting me jobs all through school. I'd go work bull sales, go fetch show cattle, help me get on the judging team. He'd jerk me back in the right direction when I'd get out of the correct direction. And he helped me get my first job out of school at Express Ranches. I was there for 16 years, and I'd like to think I'm still a part of that family down there as well. And now I have a family, my wife Amy, my son Cooper, and my daughter Emma. Once I left school, Dr. Kropp never quit contacting me. It was usually around Christmas. He'd wish me Merry Christmas, ask me how I'm doing. He was like a dad to me. My mom and dad never knew where I even lived at Stillwater. They never came to my graduation. They didn't know much about Stillwater until about 2 or 3 years when I said, "I'm not coming back for Christmas. You're gonna have to come down here because I got too much work to do at the ranch." And I've been trying to think of something good to say about Doc that nobody else has, but coming up here, and I hate to say this, that my wife was right, I never got to be a part of FFA. My kids did. It's a great organization, and I've sat through opening ceremonies quite often, and we're going to go to the state FFA convention tonight. My daughter's receiving the honorary degree, and she said, "You know, I think that Dr. Kropp is a wise old owl here. He's always advising us from day to day, and he still is. He's not gone. He's right here in our heart. He's always going to be in my heart, just like you all are a part of my family. He supported me and my family every step of the way, and I'm going to miss him. But he's always with us every day. Thank you for letting me speak."
I'd like to invite Dr. Richard Coffey.
Good morning. Like everybody has said, it was an absolute honor when Bob called and said, "Hey, I'd like for you to speak," particularly on behalf of the department. So I'm certainly honored to do that. You know, some people it's pretty easy to get up and say good things about, and Bob is one of those. You know, as a little bit of an aside, I don't know if you had the same experiences I've had, but occasionally I've gone to funerals and listened to people like me get up and talk, and others, and you hear all these wonderful things. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, am I at the right spot? You know, because that's really not the person I remember. They were a little bit of a scoundrel, maybe a little hard to get along with, but that's certainly not the case with Bob. Certainly not a perfect man, but a really, really good one. So really honored to be able to share a few things. You know, I first got to know Bob because, like many of you, he was an advisor when I came as an undergrad student. So I got to know him early in my life when I was here as an undergrad and as a master's student. But then I took a hiatus for about 32 years in Kentucky before I came back and got to know him in a little bit different capacity when I came in as department head. So there's like a 32-year block of time where I really didn't have a lot of interaction with him. So to kind of help me fill in the gaps, one of the things that as a department head that I have access to are the personnel files on everybody that's ever worked in the department. So that's some interesting reading sometime. Unfortunately, y'all can't experience that, but it's kind of interesting. And I actually learned a few things about Dr. Kropp that I didn't know. For example, until I pulled out his file, I didn't realize his first name was Johnnie. Many of you probably knew that. I also didn't realize that apparently the going rate to hire a new assistant professor in 1972 was like $16,000. I saw Bob Terry back there somewhere, another fellow department head. We could make some hay with that today. Now, the other thing that was really interesting about Bob, he got to work for, or as most faculty will say, that he got to train 5 different department heads, starting with Dr. Hillier, Dr. Tadashek, Don Wagner, Ron Kinsinger, and then Clint Russ. So he got to experience 5 different ones, and nobody should have to be tormented with that many department heads. But one of the really neat things you find out pretty quick as you kind of read through the pedigree and you see all the performance reviews and the CVs that he put together, he bled orange. I mean, his whole life and career really revolved around Oklahoma State and more specifically, the department of then, what was the Department of Animal Science. He was somebody that absolutely rode for the brand. You know, he came here as an undergrad student, so he got all 3 of his degrees from here, both his bachelor's, his master's, and his PhD. His whole career was spent at Oklahoma State University, 42 years worth. You've heard a lot of those stories from different people today about things that he did. But yeah, retired in 2014 with 42 years. That's pretty amazing. You've heard from several that were on judging teams that he did. That was a big part of his life from 1972 to 1981, something that he really loved and enjoyed. And he is one of those people that really is a part of that history and culture and tradition of competitive teams at Oklahoma State. So we have him to really thank for that. You've heard how he was really valued as an evaluator of livestock. I read in some of his stuff that he has judged over 700 state or national shows, a lot of those kind of purebred oriented, both heifer and steers, 38 different states and several different countries. So really somebody that was respected for that part of his expertise. The other thing that you've heard a lot about, and this is really, I think, where his true passion was his time as a classroom instructor, as an advisor and a mentor to students. And so many of us were touched in that way, myself included. You know, I don't think, as I read through his stuff, there is probably not a department, a college, or a university teaching or advising award that Dr. Kropp didn't receive at some point in his career, which just speaks to the kind of person he was as that. You've heard, he absolutely poured his heart into students. He is one of those that we can hold up as a model and that I can hold up to faculty now and say, okay, if you really want to be successful as an instructor, if you really want to have impact on students, here's how you do it. Because he did it well. And you've heard so many stories about how it wasn't just, you know, do well in the classroom, but do well in life. And that was one thing that he did really, really well. He taught a lot of different courses in the department. It was interesting reading through that list, everything from live animal evaluation, feeds and feeding, applied animal nutrition, commercial cow-calf management, beef production, seed stock and feedlot management, beef seed stock management and marketing, and there's actually a few more. So he really taught just a ton of things, just a wealth of knowledge that he was able to share with our students. It's been estimated that over his career, he probably taught around 12,000 students. That's a huge number, 12,000 students. And his own personal advisees probably numbers a little over 1,500. So person that just had an amazing impact on so many lives. And he is just a great example of not really understanding how something we do with one person can really tentacle out and just have major impact really across the world. And so he has definitely had that kind of impact. So without question, I mean, we all knew that one of the things that made him successful was the knowledge that he had, the ability to teach that, the way to think critically, the way to apply that, had a very practical approach to everything he did. But I think what you heard people say today, and I can attest to it from personal knowledge, what really helped set him apart was really that you knew as a student he cared for you. And he wanted you to succeed. And he would push you sometimes with that dry eraser or that word that would come to get the best out of you that he could. And so he really did that well. And so his guidance for me personally are some things that really has helped me as I've progressed in my own personal professional career. You know, if all of you that have anything to do with Oklahoma State know that we kind of live by that cowboy code. It's something we've probably all read 100 times, and I went back and looked at that again and thought, you know, this is in ways, this is probably a good description of Dr. Bob Kropp. So I'm going to remind you what those 7 attributes are that really kind of symbolize how we as individuals and we as a department and we as a university really want to have as a part of our culture. So think about these, and if you've not read them in a while, listen to this. So the first part of the code says, we end the day knowing we gave it everything we had. And that is certainly Dr. Bob. He had a great work ethic. The second one says, we dream as big as the sky. And as you've heard, he was an innovator, he was a great thinker, but more importantly, he instilled that in those that he worked with. The third thing says, we know challenges come with pain, but pain will not win. He seized every opportunity, regardless of how much it might cost him or the amount of effort that it would take. The fourth thing says, we have a passion to do what's right, even when it's hard. He understood that responsibility and leadership can at times be a lonely place because you may be standing there by yourself, but he would do it. The fifth thing says, oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. The sixth one says, we finish what we start. And that described him. He knew the task wasn't done until it was really finished. It didn't stop just because the sun went down. That was Dr. Bob. And the last one, and I think this really fits him well, it says, being a cowboy isn't in our clothes, it's in our character. And that is definitely him. I mean, he was certainly a person that was sincere, was honest, and everything he did with integrity. So just a wonderful man. So I would submit that those 7 things really do describe Dr. Bob to a T. So the last thing I'll share is something that I did find in his personnel file. Every year when we evaluate faculty, we have to have kind of a summary statement that in our mind as an administrator, as a department head, kind of summarizes what we think about that person for that year. And I thought this one did a really good job, and in many ways, it's pretty similar to almost every one you would read. And the good thing is it's pretty short, but it is really neat. So let me read this, and I'm going to quote it word for word. So it says, this can be short. Bob continues to be an excellent teacher and advisor to many students. He is a father away from home to a great many students. Sorry, I told myself I'd get through this. Big, deep breath, somebody said. He is a father away from home to a great many students in terms of his care, concern, and helpfulness to them. He also seemingly knows everyone and remembers past students very well. All in all, Bob teaches a wide array of courses, advises many students very well, is extremely knowledgeable about all aspects of the beef industry, and is a true goodwill ambassador for animal science, agriculture, and OSU. He is very service-oriented, which more faculty should be. He is also very helpful to our extension group and meets people in conducting our beef quality summits. There have been over 24 of these, servicing over 700 participants. Bob's involvement in these is always very impressive because of the wealth of knowledge and expertise he conveys. No one else around here could do what he does. In summary, Bob is not only a tremendous asset to our department, but a wonderful person as well. He portrays eternal helpfulness and goodwill towards others and is always very helpful, loyal, dedicated, and friendly. My only suggestion is to keep up the good work and attitude. I appreciate him very much and thank him for everything he does to make animal science what it is. So that was his summary for one of his evaluations. And I think that really describes him well. You know, somebody mentioned earlier, you know, there are those that we look at in our department that are some of those iconic folks that really have helped blaze the trail and create the culture for what the Department of now Animal and Food Science is really known for. Excellence in competitive teams, excellence in instruction, excellence in research, excellence in outreach. And Dr. Bob is certainly one of those that has helped lay the foundation for that. So I'm eternally grateful for that. You know, I think if Bob were here and able to tell us something, I think he would say something that I heard him say a few times. It's also, if you go to Todd Arena, we've got those chairbacks. You know, when the Animal Science Alumni Associations, when they put you in the Hall of Fame, one of the statements on there, and I've heard him say it before, he would say, "It's been a ride." So I think all of us can say, thanks for letting us share it.
If y'all would like to just stand and stretch for a moment, I think that would be appropriate at this time. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here today to speak on behalf of my great friend Bob Kropp. I've known Bob for a little over 40 years. I've shown cattle under him. My kids have shown cattle under him. He was always fair. He was always objective. Sometimes we won, sometimes we lost. You know, a lot has been said about Bob here in the last several minutes, and we could go on and on. One thing I wanted to share with y'all this morning, when I first met Bob, and probably the first 30 years, the relationship really was based on three things. Yeah, friendship, the cattle business, and sports. Loved to talk football. All of you know that. But the last few years, our conversation has really transitioned into becoming more faith-based. He talked more about his faith. As all of you know, he experienced some pretty challenging times. So, as I prayed and thought about what I might share with you this morning, I think it's only appropriate that, first of all, I want to go to the scriptures. And I was drawn to these words in the Gospel of John. And I'm going to just share a few words with you from the very end of the 13th chapter of the Gospel of John. My main points that I want to share with you this morning are John 14, 1 through 6. Of course, in John 13, Jesus is with his disciples right before he's fixing to go to the cross. He's meeting with his disciples. He's giving them last-minute instructions, and he's really focusing on two things in the 13th chapter of John. One, he's trying to emphasize and teach them how to be a servant. The second thing he's teaching them is how to love. And he picks up, John does, in the 13th chapter, beginning in verse 33. Listen carefully. Listen, he says, little children, yet a little while I am with you, you will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And then the first question from Simon Peter. He says, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered him, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward. Peter said to him, second question, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. And then John goes on to write this, beginning in verse 1 of John 14. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, what I have told you, that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? The key verse, verse 6, John 14. John writes, Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I'm so grateful to Paul for these next words that I'm going to share with you. This was about a week ago. And I just asked Paul if he would just reflect on some words that came from the mouth of his father that meant a lot to him, that mean a lot to me, and hopefully they mean a lot to you. Just 11 words. And I quote, Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. Oh, Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. Bob had a trust. He had a belief. And as we reflect on those verses that I shared from you from John 13 and John 14, and as Jesus talks about heaven, where he's emphasizing his departure from earth after the resurrection to prepare his disciples and us for departing from earth when we die. And I had just a couple of questions this morning that were thought-provoking over the last several days as we gathered this morning to celebrate the life and the homegoing of Bob Kropp. You know, funerals are not for those that have passed. Funerals are for those that are the living. And my two questions are as follows. What kind of legacy for tomorrow are you creating today? When the next generation looks back on your life, how will they remember you? How will they remember you? You know, obviously we've heard accomplishment after accomplishment of this man of incredible impact. And I ask this question, what shall we say of Bob's legacy? What shall we say of Bob's legacy? One, it was a life of helpfulness. You know, Hershel shared earlier how he helped people to succeed. Dr. Coffey mentioned the number of students that he's touched, 12,000 students. It was a life of helpfulness. Secondly, a life of humility, kindness, and fairness. Thirdly, it was a life of faithfulness. Fourthly, it was a life of friendship. A great friend to me, great friend to many of you. And one thing I thought about this morning, just hearing several of you talk as I reflect on the life of Bob Kropp, is these words: every generation reaching the next generation. What a great reminder to all of us this morning as we celebrate this great man. And lastly, he left a legacy of blessed hope. Bob loved people. He loved the Lord. And I end with this once again, the quote, "Oh Jesus, I surrender myself to you. Take care of everything. Have you surrendered?" Thank you.
You may be seated. In just a moment, we're going to open the casket for anyone wishing to pay their last respects. Our funeral directors will guide you down the center aisle for the viewing. Please come down, of course, the center aisle, and then when you exit, you'll go out the side aisle back to the doors in the back. You may also choose to just go ahead and exit before the viewing if you wish. And if you need to use an elevator to exit the building, that's found right outside this door over here. Now I'd like to offer you these words of benediction and blessing. May the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And may the blessing of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be with you and remain among you always. Amen.